chair prior to Cameron taking over the chairmanship, wrote me an email saying that he had passed away, because I just heard from Professor Hilton 36 hours before. I had heard off forum from Dr. Gardner and a number of other people that he was not doing well, but his death came as such a shock to me. But getting back to Randy's point, I know Professor Hilton was not diplomatic often in pointing out people's errors. He would sometimes just copy, if ever a typo got out on WAIS or something that I edited, he would just shoot it back to me and saying, this is wrong. Or occasionally he will tell people, you are wrong. Which is something I never do. I always say, well, you know, your point is an excellent one. Thank you, thank you for your kind words. What is it called? A praise sandwich, where you start with praise and you put the criticism in there, and then you end with some nice praise and try to smooth over those ruffled feathers. But Professor Hilton could be curt, he could be abrupt, he could be rather scolding at times, and so it's a good thing that we didn't have that experience.
Don't misunderstand me, I was woodshed.
Yeah, he did.
But
He never shot away from the
He
woodshed.
didn't do it out of meanness, he did it out of the attempt to let me know that there were other views that were probably more accurate.
Now, if we look at, I would say Ronald Hilton's 2 or 3 greatest contributions to intellectual history, or history in general. Well, his one huge brush with history we're all aware of, you just can read his Wikipedia biography, and that was that Professor Hilton was probably the first academic in the United States to become aware of the imminent Bay of Pigs invasion. I think we're all aware of that. That he talked about it at great length, and if I can summarize, and please jump in and correct me if I have this a little bit wrong, but he was in Guatemala prior to the invasion, where a force was being trained, a force of Cuban emigres were being trained for the upcoming invasion, and became aware of that and came back and published a note in the Hispanic American Report, I believe, on this is what was going on. And that note was picked up by the New York Times. This is in the months leading up to the invasion, and they were about ready to publish it in the New York Times when some high-ranking official of the Kennedy administration put in a telephone call and said, this, you have to spike this story. And so it was never published. Now, the question remains, had this note been published, how would history have been, how would it have played out differently? That's a question we can never answer, but certainly we can speculate a great deal on that. And so that is probably the major footnote that Ronald Hilton occupies in international history. As far as his intellectual contribution, I think Cameron brought this up a little bit in his remarks earlier today, but Professor Hilton took us online. He transitioned us from a hard copy journal to a virtual journal when this was almost an unheard of thing. That our roots go back to the early 90s, that we've been essentially exclusively an online publication. And because of that, we are arguably, and Professor Hilton said this all the time, that we were the first. We were the first international studies forum to work exclusively on the internet. I have not been able to substantiate that. And there are some blogs that, we're not a blog to be sure, but there are some online internet publications, serial publications, that do trace back to the early 80s and even some in the late 70s that use different types of means to publish electronically. But we're definitely not the oldest blog type publication in existence, but we are arguably the oldest international studies forum in the world. And Roman and his team have been very good at unearthing some of the earliest WAIS postings that were not on our existing website, but are just floating out there in cyberspace. And now our archive is complete back to 1997, I believe.
I believe so.
Yes. And So we've now archived over 25,000 posters, and that is an extraordinary intellectual legacy. And also, Roman and his team have improved our search functions so we can, the older material can be found much more easily. So, Tom, your thoughts? I know you came to our organization through David Pike, so
Yeah.
you're sort of I don't know, you'd be the Alexander the Great to the Socrates, if David Pike would be the Aristotle.
Yeah,
If
that's
look at that intellectual progression there.
that sounds right. Yes, Alexander the Great. Yeah, that's good. Because official title of my master's degree is a Master of Science in Empire. So it's actually goes fits because well, I was a back student in Paris. I was studying at the Sorbonne for the French language, and then I was taking one course at the American University in Paris, where David was a professor, and then we had some reception for the opening of new program. I was there. I was dressing a bit nicely, so I looked a bit older, and then we are talking about the cheese and the wine, and then talking about Japan. He's really very interested in Japan, and then he forwarded my information to Professor Hilton. We had some communication. He had lengthy questions about how Japanese actually think, and I made the point that Japanese are always going back and forth between extremely like a Professor Hilton type of like provocative, so to say, and very vocalized opinions. Those group of people, and then majority who is always going with the wind, so to say. So this kind of like intellectual diversity, so to say, existing in Japan, and I explained that, and then he invited me to join, and then he asked me if I want to give a short paper on Japan in a Stanford conference. That was 2006.
2006, yes.
Yeah, 2006. But then I went there, and that's where I met many of you here. And yeah, I gave a speech on Japanese emperors.
Tom, I'm pretty confident you were the youngest participant in that conference.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and probably still today, I'm the youngest member of the WAIS, and I think I'm the only one, if not, I think I'm the only one who was recruited to WAIS while I'm a student, because I was still a student at the Boston, and it was very interesting because when we had a conference in 2006, I also converted to Christianity. So he was very interested in why, how does my thoughts in like in the Japanese background, so to say, like in the Sikhism and Buddhism, does not conflict with Christianity, and because I particularly chose Catholicism instead over Protestantism, and he was always wondering how I made that decision, and also back then I had a girlfriend, and then she's from States, but she's a half Mexican, half German, so also Professor Hilton was interested in how I'm so getting used to with non-Japanese in the personal life as well. And year before I joined, I was also in Russia for St. Petersburg for half a year. So he was also interested in how I see St. Petersburg and so on. So we had quite a long discussion. And also he really wanted me to send my high school textbook. um, Give me all the textbook, and I called my parents and said, "Do you still keep the textbook?" And we couldn't find it, and so that's a pity. But yeah,
join us for the tour of Torquay?
At the moment, I'm still trying to do a tour of Skype.
I had many other topics I wanted to bring up, such as Professor Hilton's sort of obsession with geography departments. Do y'all recall it? That was one of the things that he conducted a one-man
Resistance.
jihad, we would say, against universities that were closing departments of geography around the country, particularly at Stanford and at Berkeley. That he saw the study of geography as a vital discipline, and certainly it was central to his, his interests. Now, what we know institutionally, geography, the ken of the study of geography has kind of been moved into different areas, be it environmental science, be it political science, be it anthropology, and so geography's kind of been kicked aside. But I would think, in a way, our, what we do here on WAIS is part of that legacy. We are concerned with geography. As we all know from Professor Hilton, it's not just knowing the capitals of the different countries and the names of rivers and things like that. It really embraces all that concerns our planet. So maybe at a later conversation. John, we're gonna break for lunch.
Okay, fine. Have a great lunch.
We will see you. I hope you can tune in tomorrow at the same time at 10 a.m. We'll try to be more punctual.
No problems.
And Vince,
Have a good day.
if you're there tomorrow at 5 a.m. for you. Okay. Thank you so much. I think our